So we chose to do a blog post on the power of lessons learned. So this is just kind of a brief summary of the entire blog post, which we can send out after the presentation because we did not send you the final one yet, but that is all set.
Great.
So like I said, I would definitely recommend reading the blog post once we send it out because it's just going to be like a quick overview of it.
Okay.
So through our blog post, our intention is that you'll be able to see the power of the mistakes and the opportunity that comes with learning the lessons behind them. So just a quick intro into the lessons learned. The power of lessons learned has a couple of benefits. It creates the ability to grow a better construction industry by collaborating with architects and contractors at project milestones while reviewing the lessons learned. And in our blog post, we do go into depth about examples for how to run those particular meetings. It's sort of unique to this industry as opposed to your typical corporate office where if you make a mistake, you might get reprimanded for it. Typically in the construction industry, the mistakes are used to grow, or that's the intent of them. They like that if you did make a mistake, you do learn from it, you grow from it, and you teach others from it. I did just state that we go through examples of how to implement the lessons learned meeting in the next couple of slides. And the goal of the lessons learned is to avoid the same mistakes again in the future. And that's something that we can do by connecting the architects and construction managers and all collaborating together, whether it's at the end of the project or specific project milestones.
Great.
So this is a quick overview of the value of lessons learned. The first one is learning from your mistakes and pretty much growing your knowledge of the industry yourself as you go in your career. So 2 is understanding where the problems occurred. And after you have your review of the milestones and what the problems were, a couple of examples of figuring out what the mistakes were they internal mistakes? Did the architects have the wrong details that didn't work? Was there bad communication? Was it an issue with subcontractors? And just those are just some of the examples of kind of figuring out where the root of the problem came from. Number 3 is recognizing and retaining organizational knowledge. Being able to admit that there was a mistake and then teaching others about it is a huge part of it. I know admitting that there was a mistake might be hard for some people, but I feel like maybe the younger generation is kind of getting up there making it okay. Like, hey, you made a mistake, but it's not a big deal. We're going to learn from it and we're going to move on. You could also do that whether it's through a company lesson learn plan, which we go into in the blog post as well, or you could even just be teaching your assistant or coworker about your dilemma as they start to come up in the industry. Number 4 was reducing future project risks. We can do this by collaborating with our coworkers, architects, etc., to avoid it. And number 5 was improving future project performance. We can talk about how to improve future performance. And some examples are if there was like a specific detail, like a structural detail that you had issues with on a project, make sure for your next project, you're reviewing those structural details well in advance so that if there are any issues, you have plenty of time to correct it and you're not kind of hustling at the end.
Mm-hmm.
The typical answer is at the end of a project, but what we saw was depending upon the scale, the schedule, and the complexity of the project, it might be of some value to have them at certain milestones. These are generally internal team exercises, but of course, if they can be done with the architects, engineers, and contractors, with all of the teams combined, the more the merrier. So, I mean, it is just a lot of connection and a lot of setting expectations as to what to do in the upcoming milestones of the same project. The topics to cover in a lessons learned meeting is what went well. So things that went well and without any hiccups. So in order to create a standard or a baseline to use in similar tasks for the project, and it is very important to understand the client expectations here. What is also important is recognizing the work and the efforts of the people that they put in and to acknowledge their efforts and make them feel seen. Then what didn't go well? So the things that went wrong and why they went wrong, and if they could have been prevented and what could have been done to avoid these mistakes in the future. So what's important here is do not take names, do not criticize anyone at all, and realize that these are just mistakes and everyone just learns from them and go forward from there. Then what can be improved? So just identifying areas of weaknesses and steps of improvements, and then actions for the future projects. So what do we have to do to commit to improve future projects? So although these improvements can be identified, all of them cannot be implemented immediately. So what are the steps of action? So, to start implementing certain steps in the projects in the near future, and what actually needs to go through an organizational change to be implemented. Next slide, please. Thanks. So addressing lessons learned. So this is circling off on what didn't go well. So the first thing to do is identifying subcategories of the things that don't go well. So these might be risks, risk management or scope discrepancies that might have come up during the course of the project or resource allotment. Then identifying the root cause of the problem, not just the warning signs, the root cause, and then seeing what all it impacted. So the schedule, the budget, which it always does, or maybe even strained relationships among different parties. And then going for lessons learned, as in how was the fire extinguished and what were the next steps taken to tackle these issues? And finally, the future preventive actions, because prevention is definitely better than firefighting all the time. So what were the early warning signs for similar problems in a future project and how they can be addressed early on in the project so that they can be prevented from becoming issues? Next slide, please.
Thanks, Pavneet. So also in our blog post, one of the key topics that we touched upon, and maybe we could even add a little bit more too, is utilizing your coworkers, and not just your coworkers, but in larger jobs where the scale is bigger, utilizing maybe subcontractors, architects, people from the design team, bringing all of them in. Those of you who are familiar with lean practice may be familiar with an icebreaker. Usually happens at the beginning of a job, where you ask everyone to announce how long they've been in the industry, how much experience they have, and you add all of that up together. And at the end, usually on a job, you're left with several hundred, if not 1,000 years of experience, depending on the job. And so that goes to show that there probably hasn't been a problem that not everyone has ever seen on a job, but the information itself either hasn't been shared or it's kept to the person who experienced that. So you really got to dive into your coworkers, your trade partners, your design team, everyone in all aspects of the job, and pick their brain and get an idea of what they've seen. Maybe they have a solution to the same exact issue or lesson that you learned, and their solution is different, maybe better, maybe worse, but there's multiple ways to approach many different problems. Next slide, please. We've kind of already summarized our blog post, but I'll hit the head points again, and I'll stop on a really important one. So we go over how to avoid the mistakes. We're all relatively new to the industry, so we're not trying to, in the blog post, we weren't trying to convey how we think the most perfect lessons learned process should be executed, but with our collective experience and the fact that we're all from different aspects of this field, we could provide some insight on what we've seen go right, what we've seen go wrong. The other thing that we touched upon that I really think we still need to dive a little bit deeper into and maybe add to is normalizing the discussion of mistakes. It's easy to sit online behind a screen and say that we should all talk about our mistakes. But if anyone's ever admitted any mistakes in our industry, you would know that usually it's followed by a lawsuit with several weeks later. So we really got to find a way, an open discussion to, change the mindset behind those mistakes. In our blog post, we talked about creating an environment. I think that environment starts at the contract level and goes up from there, and putting verbiage in there so that everyone coming to the table knows that there's a safe space that they could talk about mistakes and come up with those solutions. So something we still need to improve on our blog post, but I think we did a good job at kind of opening up the reader to, what creates those lessons, how you learn them, and what's the great environment to have those lessons be announced without threat of prosecution.